New videos every day.
Now, if you had a dog and let's say the owner beat him a little bit, eventually the dog would figure out that the owner's not really very cool and he wouldn't like the owner. So, but let's say you beat the dog even more. It would get to a point where that dog would learn to associate pain with all people in general. And eventually you could actually beat the dog so much he would lose his ability to differentiate between any person and all people would be scary to him, right? The same thing happens to people with emotional losses. Say somebody gets in a relationship and maybe they marry a baker or something, right? So the relationship ends horribly and the person goes, I am never going to marry a baker again. Bakers are bad. So then they get in another relationship and then they get jilted again. And pretty soon they're thinking like, well, men are not somebody that I can trust, right? Then they get in another relationship and they're abused even more, just like beating the dog enough until he can't differentiate. And they get to a point where I no longer want to have a relationship because all men are pigs and all men want are sex. So as you can actually traumatize a person to a point where the mind cannot differentiate. And if you look at a person who has like social anxiety disorder or something, you might think, well, back in that person's childhood, maybe they were bullied around. But at some point, it was very few people that actually bullied them, but they became to associate other people with being bullied to the point that they no longer trust anyone or no longer feel comfortable around anybody. The more you abuse somebody or traumatize them or the more that they've had bad experiences with the subject, the less likely they are to be able to tell differences and the more they're able to operate off generalities and stereotypes. So another way that people can actually become prejudiced or lose their ability to differentiate on a subject is just through indoctrination and control of language. You know, Hitler was actually able to convince an entire population that Jewish people were bad. And before he did that, he actually convinced people through a propaganda machine that mentally ill people were life not worthy of living. And they began actually exterminating people with mental illness before they did the Jews and other racial groups, right? So trauma and indoctrination can both bring about a state of mind where a person is incapable of seeing differences and sort of sees through this filter of prejudice. So since we're talking about inability to see differences, I'm going to make a comment on atheism, right? Atheism is nothing more than a disbelief in a god or gods. It has no agenda. It's simply a non-belief. Now there's a difference between atheism and anti-theism, which is somebody who is against the idea of God and will openly attack theism or the belief in God. Now there's a difference between atheism, anti-theism, and anti-religiosity, where a person is anti-religion and blanketly wants to stop or wipe out all religion. The reason I mention this is, you know, all too often we see these people on YouTube that are anti-theistic or they're anti-Christian or they're anti-religious, and they attack these things under the banner of atheism, which, again, atheism has no agenda, but anti-theism does. Atheism has no agenda, but an anti-religious person does have an agenda. So these people will frequently use terms like Christianity, Islam, young earth creationist, theism, and religion, all as if it was the same thing. And there are clear differences. You know, they're taking the banana, the orange, and the lemon, and they're clumping them all together under this one idea of religion. Now, there are obvious differences. Some religions are actually atheistic in nature or don't have a dogma about God whatsoever. So you'll frequently hear this argument that's almost like, well, These young earth creationists don't believe in evolution, therefore religious people is bad and religion stops science. Well, no, that one little specific group of religious people has a problem with it, but not all religious people. In fact, the Catholic Church actually acknowledges evolution, and evolution was actually described in the Hindu Veda 4,000 years ago to some degree. So theism and Christianity or young earth creationism is not the same thing. Now, sometimes I think people just haven't really studied enough of various religions to understand what the differences are. Other times people are just kind of stupid, which is defined as an inability to tell the difference between things, right? And sometimes people are angry because they felt like they've been jilted or abused by religion, right? Now, I don't have any problem with atheism as a disbelief in a god or gods. Atheism has no agenda. But this is one of the problems that I have with, say, the Rational Response Squad or Richard Dawkins, is they use words like theism, religion, and Christianity interchangeably, as if they're the same thing when they are completely not. I might expect that from an uneducated person. I might expect that from somebody who's stupid. I would not expect that from an educated person like Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins clearly knows the difference between fundamentalist Christians, theism, and religion. Yet he uses the words interchangeably and categorizes them all under this one heading of religion, and then gives examples of extreme Christians or extreme Muslims and says all religion is bad. He pushes an anti-religion agenda and calls it atheism, which is something that has no agenda. Now, because the man can clearly tell the difference, I just have to think that he's doing it intentionally as a method of controlling language, as a method of trying to get other people on the same bandwagon or on the same agenda that he has. So at the end of the day, what's the difference between an extreme religious person who wants to eliminate all religions except for his own and Richard Dawkins? Is the person who is the religious extremist hates one less religion than Richard Dawkins.